أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Brothers and sisters, my name is Hussein Siddiqui, and we like to welcome you all for this third event of the month, the Islamic History Month. Unfortunately, Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick is not in town. He's out of town. He had to go to UK for a conference. But we still have the other panelists who will be here, who will be speaking to us. Before that, I'd like to invite Ziad Jahandar for Quranic recitation, inshallah, and then we'll start the program.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا آمنوا بالله ورسوله والكتاب الذي نزل على رسوله والكتاب الذي أنزل من قبل ومن يكفر بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر فقد ضل ضلالا بعيدا. صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah Qari Ziad. I'd like to read a brief translation of that. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. O believers, stand firm for justice as witnesses for Allah, even if it is against yourselves, your parents or close relatives. Be they rich or poor, Allah is best to ensure their interests. So do not let your desires cause you to deviate from justice. If you distort the testimony or refuse to give it, then know that Allah is certainly all aware of what you do. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. I now like to introduce the first speaker. He is Aidan Alexio. He's a lawyer and human rights policy analyst for Justice for All Canada. His work focuses on provincial analysis, human rights policies from a legal perspective. Aidan is the author of the report on Islamophobia and the genocide of Muslim minorities, as well as a new report on the genocide in Palestine. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce, please. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement, inshallah. So as Muslims, we acknowledge that Toronto is the traditional lands of the indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit and other First Nations, as well as other Inuit and Métis communities. We also recognize Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with various indigenous nations. So we'd also like to thank IIT for this event tonight, as well as Mohammed Farhad Khadim, Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick, Mamoon Hassan, as well as our co-panelists and our guests today. So just starting with a presentation overview, I'll provide an introduction to Justice for All Canada, inshallah, a brief discussion about Islamophobia, as well as its relation to the genocidal situations we'll be discussing today, including the Uyghurs, the Rohingya, the Muslims from Central African Republic, as well as Indian Muslims. So Introduction to Justice for All Canada, we are a human rights advocacy organization with consultative status at the UN. We advocate on behalf of Muslim minorities facing oppression, crimes against humanity, and genocide. We've been operating in Canada since 2012, with our US office operating prior to that. And our campaigns include the Save Palestine campaign, Save Uyghur campaign, Save India from Fascism, Kashmir Action, our Burma Task Force, Prisoners of Conscience, and our Indigenous Solidarity campaign. So a bit about the work that we do. We focus on community education, community organization, building coalitions. We have our Action Alerts program. We also produce research reports and memos. We meet with federal MPs and lobby them to change their policies on behalf of Muslim minorities, including the ones I mentioned previously. We have our Media Watch team, which alhamdulillah is growing. We have a growing team of volunteers who are responding to media bias, whether written and broadcast, as well as publishing op-eds. So, a brief discussion about Islamophobia. It's been defined in various ways by the academics, some link it to power. I chose a simple definition which the UN uses here today. Islamophobia is the irrational fear or hatred of Muslims, which can lead to harassment, abuse, and violence. And what we'll see today is Muslims portrayed as either terrorists or extremists or separatists or foreigners, which is used to justify the genocidal violence against them and the persecution. So starting with the Uyghurs, this is a term we may have heard before, some of us may know about this. The Uyghurs are located in East Turkestan, also known as the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, which is currently located in modern-day China. And they're being severely persecuted and suffering currently from a genocide. And this is recognized by US Secretary of State and Canadian House of Commons. It's a long history behind it, but essentially they were depicted as terrorists, extremists, and separatists, and approximately 2 million Uyghurs are currently arbitrarily detained in what are called re-education camps. Some even estimate that up to 3 million Uyghurs are in these camps. And the witness accounts say that these camps are more akin to concentration camps due to what's going on there, and this is from the Canadian report on this subject. There's a significant suppression of their religious beliefs and practices, both within and outside of the camps, and they are subject to forced labor, forced sterilization, indoctrinating schools for their children, the destruction of their mosques, as well as intrusive surveillance techniques in their societies. So as I mentioned before, this situation has already been declared as a genocide by the US Secretary of State, the Canadian House of Commons, as well as the Canadian Subcommittee on International Human Rights. And I'll explain why a declaration of genocide is important later, inshallah. Next, the Rohingya situation. Due to the systemic promotion of Islamophobic narratives that Rohingya Muslims are terrorists, they were also called Bengali foreigners, or they were called a problem for the Burma, that led to a 2017 genocide committed by the Burmese military. These attacks included the burning and the looting of entire villages, mass killings, as well as systemic sexual violence. And as a result, approximately 1.6 Rohingya today were forced to flee to Bangladesh in one of the largest refugee crises in the world, where they face very troubling situations. And the remaining Rohingya who are still in Myanmar, or otherwise called Burma, are also facing persecution there, as well as due to the civil conflict. So a declaration of genocide was also made in this case by the U.S. Secretary of State, and a case was filed at the ICJ by the Gambia against Myanmar for this genocide, which Canada joined. So some of you may remember that a genocide case was also commenced against Israel on behalf of South Africa, so this would be the equivalent. But the difference is, in this case, Canada actually joined the case. In that case, Canada didn't join the case against Palestine. But as I mentioned here today, there's been little accountability for the perpetrators of these crimes, which continue today. Next is Central African Republic. So this is a country that many of us may not know as much about as the other ones, largely due to France's colonialism in the region and neocolonialism, which continues to this day. It's led to political unrest and very unstable conditions within the country. So in 2013, Muslim minorities in this country also suffered from a genocide and has been disproportionately the victims of sectarian violence since this time. Almost all the mosques were destroyed in this country, and over 1.1 million Central Africans were displaced, the vast majority of them being Muslim. And again, in this case, the Muslim civilians were considered to be foreigners or terrorists, and the solution was that they should either leave the country or be killed. And just to expand actually on the colonialism, which happened to this day, Central African Republic is known for its rich resources in natural resources, uranium, I believe gold, diamonds, and agricultural resources, but they have a 0% GDP. So that's as a result of the colonialism and the continued extraction of the resources, particularly by France. Finally, we have India. So India is a country where 2 genocide alerts as well as a genocide emergency was issued by Genocide Watch. It's a reputable non-governmental organization. And what has happened there is the country has become extremely polarized between the Hindu majority and the religious minorities, which include the Muslims. So due in part to the ruling BJP party, their increased use of Islamophobic rhetoric and their complicity towards persecution, Muslims are labeled as extremists and trying to convert the country into an Islamic state. So there have actually been open calls for the genocide of Muslims in India, as well as discriminatory laws passed. So we may have heard about the hijab ban, the citizenship laws which make Muslims stateless, as well as the grave human rights abuses against Muslims in Kashmir. We've also seen mob lynchings as a result of Muslims being accused of consuming beef and other things of this nature. So the Indian government has largely adopted a stance of denial towards the situation faced by the Muslims, and violence was also directed towards the protesters. You may recall the 2020 protests in New Delhi, where violence was essentially condoned towards the protesters at that time. And if a concerted effort is not made to stop the genocidal processes occurring in India, the Hindu nationalists may well act upon their declared plans for a Muslim genocide. So thank you. That was a brief overview. I know these situations are very complex, but in the limited time I had to try to provide an overview for the panel that's to follow, inshallah. If you guys would like to subscribe for some human rights updates from Justice for All Canada, you can use your phone's camera to scan the QR code and receive updates, inshallah. So I would like to call upon our panelists, our moderator and our panelists for the panel discussion, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Brother Aiden, for that helpful overview before we get into our panelists for this evening. And once again, thank you to the organizers, the Islamic Institute of Toronto, as well as this wonderful audience that we have here today. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce our esteemed panelists who we will be hearing from today, and I'll call them up one by one by reading out their biography. And of course, I cannot do justice to all of the wonderful human rights work that they're doing, the research and the campaigning, but I'll try my best to encapsulate. So inshallah, we'll begin with Brother Rais Tinmong. He is a Rohingya Canadian from Akyab, and he is currently based out of Toronto. He is the founder and board chair of the Rohingya Human Rights Network, which is a coalition of civil society organizations within Rohingya refugee camps, supported by diaspora members and allies. Rais has spearheaded numerous human rights campaigns, petitions, peaceful rallies, and media production initiatives, all all aimed at preserving Rohingya identity as well as raising awareness of the genocide in the region at this time. He has led delegates to present at significant institutions, including the Canadian Parliament, the Museum for Human Rights, the Montreal Holocaust Museum, the UN's Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar-Burma, and the International Court of Justice. Beyond his advocacy, Rais leads a charity that supports education and vocational training for Rohingya diaspora and their host communities across Burma, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Pakistan. He has also contributed to long-term development and projects in Haiti, Ecuador, and South Africa. Additionally, Rais is actively involved in Palestinian activism, leading a local Toronto chapter. Welcome, Brother Rais. Thank you. Next, and certainly not least, is Sister Naila Saeed. She is the Vice President of the Canadian Council of Indian Muslims, or the CCIM. She is a passionate advocate for Indian minority communities, and she holds extensive experience working on issues related to human rights, social justice, and community empowerment, both in Canada as well as for impacted minorities in India through a number of humanitarian projects. Naila has been instrumental in organizing campaigns and events that address the challenges faced by minorities in India, and she continues to work towards creating a more inclusive and equitable society. I'm so glad to be joined by Sister Naila Saeed today. Welcome to the discussion. Today we wanted to hear from community leaders, community advocates, who are specifically, however, from the diaspora impacted community. And we've strived to bring you those voices today. We also have a human rights, legal, and policy analyst perspective from Brother Aiden, and he will be able to provide insights and answer questions using that perspective. And before we go ahead and begin, it's very important for us to acknowledge tonight that for more than 1 year, there has been a devastating mass genocide and ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza, as well as the remaining occupied Palestinian territories. And that genocide has been taking place by the Israeli Defense Forces under instruction of the Israeli government, under the long-standing apartheid in the region. And tonight, we hold Palestinians dear in our heart, and we remember the genocide and the human rights violations that they are enduring. And we are attempting to look at tonight similar genocides that are driven by Islamophobia, that are driven by anti-Muslim persecution, and where the aggressor is similar in their background of Islamophobic policies as well as fascism and injustice towards Muslim minorities such as the Palestinians. And we'll definitely hear a lot of different correlations between the Muslims that we're going to explore today as well as Palestinians. So I just wanted to make that acknowledgement very, very briefly there. I wanted to go ahead and begin with sharing questions for each of our panelists, and then we'll go in order of the of how we start. And I'll have our panelists really speak from the heart as well as from their professional and lived experiences. So first, I wanted to hear from Brother Rais Tinmong about the Rohingya Muslim genocide. Brother Rais, according to human rights experts, there has been a long-standing persecution of Rohingya, including their systematic disenfranchisement. In fact, just over the past couple of months, a couple hundred Rohingya in their indigenous homeland of Maungdaw were killed by drones simply because they were trying to get their family over the border. And in your view, in light of the overall genocide, but also the recent events that we've seen against Rohingya Muslims, what are the key drivers of state-sponsored Islamophobia in Burma, Myanmar? and how has it evolved over the years to become the genocide that it is today? If you can speak to that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Saliha, and thank you for a very elaborate bio. Thank you everybody for coming down, and Jazakallah khair to IIT for hosting this again. A lot of the masajids, including the masjid where I go to, do not host for some reason in Islamic History Month. Although it's actually Islamic History Month that should be celebrated, and so Jazakallah for IIT for doing this. We need that kind of spirit to go everywhere else in GTA and across Canada, inshallah. To answer that question, first of all, before answering the question, I want to say I am a very privileged Rohingya. Allah Ta'ala has given me, I live in one of the best places in the world. I've got food to eat, I've got a roof over my head, I've got my parents, alhamdulillah. I've got some of my family, the extended family are dead. Some of them recently died in what you just mentioned about what's happening in Burma today. But alhamdulillah, I at least I can look forward to tomorrow. I have a job, I have a career, alhamdulillah. I do this as a way to give back to my own people. The person who would deserve to sit here and speak would be a brother or sister who is in the refugee camps, I talk to them every day, and wallahi, if there was a way to bring them live or let them speak, they would be the right person to speak because they're going through this today. So, having said that, I'm just only a voice, and here I am to express whatever I learn from them as I talk to them every day. Alhamdulillah, I go to the camps myself, once a year, if not every 2 years. So, coming back to the question and what is the driving force? Starting from what is happening today. Today, and as well as whatever has happened in the past, the last massacre, which brother just mentioned about, in 2017, where about 750,000 people were forced to go into the refugee camps. And then the previous massacres in 2012, when my own parents' villages were exterminated, they don't exist on the maps anymore. And the ones before that in the 90s, the 70s, when my parents crossed the river, all of that, it goes to the root cause of how they see us Muslims and people of color, people of our, ethnicity, which is very different from the Bamar ethnicity. They're more like, Thai, Southeast Asian, which is very different from us, as others, They do not recognize, or they want to utilize that othering in order to disenfranchise and take advantage of whatever they can politically and economically in order to gain land and in order to gain political power. That has been at the core of all of what is happening today and what happened back in 2017 in the last massacre. So how do you utilize that? So first, we are already different. And first, we are already, we have a different faith. We believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla, and that's the reason why we are persecuted. Coming back to what Sister Saliha shared, the similarities between what is happening in Palestine today and what is happening to us, what is happening to Indian Muslims, what is happening, it is at the core of it, wallahi, is the fact that we say La ilaha illallah and the others do not say that, and we are targeted because of that. So, how do you utilize that in order to galvanize your political agenda? So on one side you have the military regime, which is trying to take control over, over the country, keeping their, hold on the power. After the coup d'etat that took place in 2022, where Aung San Suu Kyi, 2021, where Aung San Suu Kyi, the de facto head of the state, who was considered as, the Nelson Mandela of the East, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, that lady. So after they toppled her, they are in a frantic struggle to maintain power in the country. While other factions of the country, other ethnic groups, Burma is made up of 135 recognized ethnic minorities, by the way. They are politically and constitutionally recognized. The Muslim minority, the Rohingyas, are not recognized in the 135 ethnic minorities. So out of the 135 ethnic minorities, the prime minorities, which could be considered as like the upper the overarching minorities, they all have militias, they have armed groups, they have tens of thousands of people in uniform with arms and tanks and artillery. They're never considered terrorists. You will never hear any Western media calling the Kashan, the Karen, or the Rakhine who are now bombarding us. The Rakhines are hardcore Burmese Buddhists who live in northwest of Myanmar, and we have coexisted with them, but they were behind the massacres of 2017 when Tatmadaw, when the Burmese military came over and burned our villages, and the Rakhines came behind them with swords. They're all documented facts, documented reports talking about how they came and slaughtered us. So now the two factions are fighting each other. The Rakhines, who are an ethnic armed group, are fighting the Burmese military that is trying to keep control of the country after the coup d'etat. And at the core of this is the othering, is that here are some Muslims who do not belong here. They're not Buddhist. They don't look like us. They're not Bamars. So they're Bengalis, and so they have to get kicked out of the country. And so when the Rakhines bomb, they bomb us. And the military bombs, or the military want to chase us, they chase us as well. And in between, when they're fighting each other, the bombs also land on us. So when we're trying to escape by crossing over the river, they will shoot us, or the bombs will drop on us, and we get killed that way. So this has been at the core of why the Rohingyas are persecuted in Myanmar. We say the kalima, and we are different from them, and that is why both the Rakhines as well as the Bamar are after us.
Thank you so much, Brother Rais, for your insightful answer. I'm going to go ahead and pose a similar question to our next panelist with us today, Sister Naila Saeed from the CCIM. Sister Naila, in the country of India, has seen a rise in Islamophobic narratives under the current political leadership of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP right-wing government. In your perspective from the human rights work that you do, can you please comment on this phenomenon of nationalism and religious intolerance? It makes a very interesting relationship in India under the government, which thereby impacts not only Muslim minorities, but also Christians in India, as well as Sikhs and Dalits and other indigenous minorities. Please comment on that, and how does that contribute to the slow genocide, especially of Muslims during this Islamic History Month?
Jazakallah for asking that, Saleh. Absolutely, the nationalism that fosters and give us a sense of belongingness, sense of pride, we are lacking in India. The rise of Islamophobic narrative in India, they have the narrative that they have created, especially the current BJP government, the Bharatiya Janata Party, they have got a very, I would say, a troubling interplay between the nationalism and the religious intolerance. It is clear that this kind of a narrative, the dynamics that they have created, has significantly impacted the Muslim community in India. Current political environment promotes that the nationalism, when they talk, the kind of narrative that they create, they always put Muslims, they exclude Muslims from that. The format that they create, the kind of the narrative exactly that they create, that they put the Muslims out of this. They make Muslims as an outsiders. They project Muslims as the threat to the national identity. And they have fostered this narrative and created a division among the communities. We have seen how publicly these leaders of BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, under the leadership of Narendra Modi, how openly and how with confidence the inflammatory language that they have used in their speeches, that legitimizes discrimination against Muslims, violence against Muslims. They have no fear. There is no law and order. How they are speaking right now, how they are delivering these hate speeches, and leaders have presented themselves very strongly, especially in North India, where I come from. I have been treated as a Muslim. We have been still proving ourselves to be an Indian. Not only in the society, in our workplaces, that how the discrimination have come, how we are now in the climate of fear, hostility, animosity. We are fearful to eat what we are supposed to. The way we are supposed to dress up, we cannot anymore. Our children, they cannot put hijabs. How they get targeted, it has become next to impossible for them, especially in the North India, to wear hijab and go to those public schools and get the good education. Either they go to the Jamaats or some Islamic institute where they are not in all the areas. We don't have that kind of institute, that kind of a standard in the Islamic institute. Unfortunately, if they have to go to the public schools, they cannot wear the hijabs, they cannot dress up Islamically, and they have to face a lot, and especially the women's and girls. So this is how the reality is in India, and especially in North India, and we have no leaders, literally no leaders to represent us. There is no voice. It has become a norm. It has accepted that they have normalized it so much that there is no problem in speaking against Muslims. There is no problem giving or saying a derogatory remarks against them. There is no problem calling openly a genocide against Muslims. There is no problem calling and telling the Hindus to rape Muslims, women. It has become a very difficult situation and a safety issue for Muslims that they get scared even unfolding their identities, even traveling with their families with the Islamic dress code. And the situation is getting worse and worse day by day. And people there is no voice across the world. There is no, even in Canada, if you see it, we have such organizations like Justice for All, NCCM. Now they have doing a lot, and especially Justice for All, how they have become and amplifying our voice. But there is no organization standing up front and raising the voice against these atrocities, against injustices done on the ground with all general Muslims, that how they are facing day to day in their lives, how they are facing in the jobs, in any kind of society that they have to move, among the friends, among the communities, that what are the injustices being done and what are the difficulties, challenges that they are facing day to day. Would end up with that.
Thank you, Sister Naila. It needs to be mentioned that recently the Royal Canadian Mountie Police, the RCMP, came out with a glaring report revealing that the Indian government is responsible for foreign interference as well as violence, targeting activists in Canada that are trying to speak up against these international human rights violations. And so we thank and we salute the courage and the strength of people such as Sister Naila and Brother Rais for their courage to speak with us today about these issues impacting so many Muslims. I want to turn focus to a question that we often receive as an advocacy organization, which is, what is the Canadian government doing? In just the recent history, Canada has acted under similar genocides. And so I wanted to turn this panel over to Brother Aiden and allude back to the report that we began with. Brother Aiden, your report includes an analysis of genocidal situations within regions such as the ones that Sister Naila is talking about, Brother Rais is talking about, including Uyghurs and Muslims in Central African Republic, as well as Palestine. But to begin, what legal obligations does Canada have in relation to such persecution of these religious minority groups?
Yeah, so there are various international treaties and domestic legislation which prevent genocide, but I would say the most fundamental one that we should all know about, inshallah, is the Genocide Convention itself. So the passing of this in about 1948 was a key milestone in international law. It's the most signed international treaty, signed by 153 countries, including Canada and the US. And its principles are considered so fundamental that even if a country didn't sign this convention, it's part of customary international law such that it's binding upon them as well. So Article 1 of the Genocide Convention confers the obligation on countries to both prevent and punish the crime of genocide. So when we're talking about the Uyghurs, the Rohingya, or the Muslims in Central African Republic, there's a need, including for the Canadian government, to prevent ongoing genocidal violence, as well as push for accountability for those who perpetrated the genocides in the past as well. So this is where, as I was mentioning earlier, that when we have those formal declarations of genocide, then this is where that comes in. As for the case with the Indian Muslims, as was mentioned, we have seen open calls now for genocide of Muslims in India, as well as the ongoing persecution. So now we're at a point where we need to prevent the genocide from occurring, and this is an obligation on Canada. What does prevent mean? The International Court of Justice says that when there's a serious risk of genocide, then the country has to use all reasonable means to prevent the genocide from occurring. So this is the legal obligation on Canada.
Thank you for that legal background. Turning our attention back to Brother Rais. Brother Rais, given your work with the Rohingya Human Rights Network, what are the immediate and long-term priorities for those Rohingya who are in exile, particularly for those who are in refugee camps? I think that we recognize that with the Rohingya genocide, it's a unique situation that there are Rohingya that are still indigenous in their home country of Rakhine that are persecuted, and then we do have those Rohingya that have been able to escape, and they're in refugee camps as well as in other places surrounding the Southeast Asia region. What should the international community focus on to support these displaced populations? So just immediate long-term priorities and what the international community should focus on. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. So for people in the refugee camps, alhamdulillah, I'm privileged to talk to them almost every day. We run projects in the refugee camps as well as in the villages, and I go and visit them. So fresh, like right off the bat, the first things that come is they don't have education nor economic liberty. So they cannot go, by law, they're not allowed to obtain education in the refugee camps. You're only allowed until grade 5. After grade 5, the Bangladeshi government denies you education, saying that you are supposed to be transitionary over here, and you're supposed to be going back. And so you're not getting education. You're not allowed to, you're absolutely not allowed to learn Bengali, because they are afraid if you start learning Bengali, you're going to come out of the refugee camps, although it's all barbed wire now. You're going to come out of refugee camps and you're going to start taking our jobs. So they don't want you to learn Bengali. But not only that, they don't want you to learn other, systematic mathematics, sciences, English language, whatever it is, because you're not supposed to stay here, you're supposed to get lost, So, and that has been the practice for the last 40 years. There are people in my team who are actually born and brought up, they haven't seen anything outside of the refugee camps all their lives. You go to any other refugee camp in the world, from Dadaab all the way to, the Syrian refugee camps, to you don't have that. That fundamental right is not denied to children. We are in a perpetual cycle of poverty and disenfranchisement because education is not allowed. The same case is in Burma, of course. In Burma, you would get even tortured and beaten and killed because you are pursuing education. As a Rohingya, you're not supposed to even have papers, you're not supposed to exist, you're not supposed to be there. So let alone if you go to a hospital, you might people are afraid to go to a hospital because they might get killed over there, So education is far-fetched. Now that's the case in Burma. Burma, it's a total, education is like a big luxury item, you would say. Come back to the refugee camps. The other immediate ask is they want to eventually return back to their homelands. They don't want to be in this limbo, living in a refugee camp forever. But you can never return to your homeland, because there is a full-fledged war going on where both factions, the Burmese military, as well as ethnic armed groups, they are targeting us because we are different. We are Muslims. You know, we are not Buddhist. We are not Bamar. So you can never go back home, and the only way you can go back home is when there is a security situation that is created with UN peacekeeping forces. But mashallah, Brother Alex mentioned about, you know, all of the international tools that are out there in the legal arena, but how does it translate? I mean, you can start saying all you can say in the legal, which is important, but if it doesn't translate into a physical peacekeeping or security force, you can never go there. And that is the reality. And the stark reality is, us Muslims in Burma, we laid down our arms back in 1949, right after Burmese independence from the British. We had a group of, you know, we had an armed faction called Mujahideen. That was how they were called. And they laid down their arms on the premise that we would be integrated, we would be given papers, and we would be integrated into the Burmese society. But that never happened. We continue to stay disenfranchised. And while all the other ethnic groups that are out there, when I just previously mentioned, you got Kasheng, Karen, Kaya, all these other different ethnic groups, they all kept their arms, and they still have arms. We never hear about them because they're not Muslims. It's okay for non-Muslims to keep arms and to fight against the Burmese regime or to fight against their governments. They will never be called terrorists. But the moment we pick up arms, we are terrorists, you know? So we don't have arms. We are sitting ducks, and as ducks, from here the Burmese military will attack us, and from there the Rakhine Buddhists, hardcore Buddhists, would attack us. And this is we are in a limbo, and this is how we will continue to stay perpetually, unless those demands where they're asking for, you ask, what are they asking for? Unless you get educated and you become sophisticated enough to at least, you know, go and ask for your demands in the international arena. And of course, you have some sort of protection, which they do not have, in order to return to their homelands.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful answer. Sister Naila, you had alluded to the widespread hijab ban in India, where government authorities are allowing schools to take away the education rights of Muslim women and Muslim girls all up until college, depending on the region in India. And this is an example of a lot of Islamic legislation that comes right from the government. It's top-down approach, and this is something that we're seeing in Myanmar against Rohingya, something that we're seeing with Palestinians under the Israeli government. So when it comes to these genocides, these are not civil wars. These are genocides that are enabled by that are normalized and enabled by basically laws coming from the top officials. So I would ask you, how do these legal mechanisms deepen Islamophobia? How does it normalize the masses, the public, to participate in this kind of Islamophobia when it comes from basically the enaction of laws? And what has been the response from Indian Muslim communities to such measures? So the question is about Islamophobic laws in India.
In India, as we know, the democracy is getting degraded day by day. Fundamental freedom, basic fundamental freedoms, right of speech, right of expression, are severely curtailed. As Sister Salia mentioned, that all the minorities, not only Muslims, Dalits, Christians, Adivasis, refugees, have become a second-class citizens. So now they are using disproportionately the targeting Muslim communities and using such laws as CAA and NRC, as we are aware of it, to reinforce the notion that Muslims are outsiders. They don't belong to India. They are creating such laws, hijab bans. There are others in many states of India that they have banned the hijab. They have normalized the situations Sister Salia was asking what the Indian community is doing about this when we are facing so much atrocities, injustices, state to state. What are we doing? A lot of organizations tried. They came forward, they became the voice, they amplified. But what they have to face? They are now either in jails or we don't know where are they. Are they alive? A big question for a lot of activists, a lot of organizations. Their license got cancelled. I'm sure a lot of people here must have heard the bulldozer policy. How they're using against these people, against these voices. They're trying to stand for us. How the government is in power, using the power, and there is no more democracy, it's fascism. Everything is in control of government. People who have tried, they face a tremendous consequences. Their family had to suffer. And that's another reason that why people are scared here to speak, to come up front, to show their pain, to talk about their families, to talk about family members, what they're facing in India. Because they're scared of their family members. They're scared of their relatives. They're scared of their safety. They're not scared of themselves. They're not scared for their safety. They're scared for their family, their relatives back home. So I really urge and request each one of you here present that you have heard all of us and you will be hearing and you should read how the Muslim community is facing either in Uyghur Muslim or Myanmar or India. What we can do here, how we can support them, how we can support the organizations like Justice for All to amplify our voices. At least this much we can do here to get those things at the international level, that we are aware of those situations and we are at least giving some power back home and we are able to do something about this where the people back home are not able to do, despite of some of the efforts that was all in vain, that they have to face a lot of personal basis, and the family has to face a lot of atrocities and injustices that we have seen.
We are so gratified to you, Sister Naila, Brother Rais, Brother Aiden, for your time. Before we move on to our next question, I want to also keep our wonderful audience members updated with our program. We want to be cognizant and respectful of the time that IIT allotted to us, so we won't go over the designated time. We have approximately maybe 16, 17 minutes until we wrap up and we can join you all for dinner, and hopefully you could also ask questions to our panelists as we join you in the crowd, inshallah. I also have two members of JFA Canada's outreach team in the audience. They're collecting emails if you'd like to be updated with our weekly action alerts and newsletters. That would be with Brother Zoaib as well as Brother Daoud. So back to Brother Aiden, and alluding to the report that you presented on at the beginning of the program. Thank you, Brother Rais, for talking about this concept of othering, as well as I think Sister Naila mentioned Muslims being framed as quote-unquote outsiders. And I think that under legal obligation terms, under the Genocide Convention, the report that Brother Aiden had published utilizes and refers to quote-unquote the 10 stages of genocide. It's a framework, and that was used to assess each of these situations as well as for other Muslim minorities under government-level persecution. Brother Aiden, if you could please elaborate on the significance of this framework when it comes to quote-unquote the 10 stages of genocide for our audience members, inshallah.
So the Genocide Convention, which I had mentioned earlier, also contains a definition of genocide. And so a country accusing another country of genocide, whether it's South Africa accusing Israel of genocide or the Gambia accusing Burma of genocide, they would use that to have a full legal analysis. So what Sister Saleh had just mentioned, the 10 stages of genocide, this is a separate framework for analysis in recognition of the fact that genocides do not occur in a vacuum. There's many different stages that occur with these. I don't have time to go through all the 10 stages, but I'll just mention some. They include the discrimination against the population, dehumanization, the polarization of the population, all the way up to the final stages, which are persecution, extermination, and denial. So in the cases of the Rohingya, the Uyghurs, and the Central African Republic, just so everyone's information, that's classified as stage 9, at least at some point, which is extermination. In the case of India, it's been classified not on stage 9, but stage 8, which is persecution, as well as stage 10, which is denial. And there's, of course, many other stages associated with all these countries. But to answer the question, the 10 stages of genocide is a framework that we use to analyze these situations and look at the persecution that these individuals are facing.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. So in interest of time, inshallah, I'm going to wrap up with a final question to our panelists. I will ask Brother Rais and Sister Naila to answer the same question, specifically about this idea of accountability, as well as actions that myself and the sisters and brothers in this room can take. I would also ask Brother Aiden, who authored the report, to conclude, inshallah, the program with talking to us about this notion of accountability, the overall lack of accountability for perpetrators, elaborating on this, as well as any final thoughts that we could take away. As Muslims, I think that it's good to be aware in terms of both what the diaspora, what the impacted community perspective is, but as well as what legal actions that we can take. So I asked Brother Aiden to do that. So specifically with the Rohingya example, Canada has not yet released the next strategy, and I know that under global affairs, a lot of Rohingya advocates have been quite concerned about the next budget, whether or not there's going to be a commitment there for Rohingya, as well as for the Indian example, Sister Naila. As I mentioned, the Canadian government has outright banned certain Indian specifically the High Commissioner, as well as Indian diplomats. They have been ousted from the country because of this revelation of foreign interference. So what I can mention is that in both of the situations, if you could please talk about what you would like to see the Canadian government do, how our policy needs to change, what kind of moves that we need in Parliament to, as Brother Aiden was saying, to be able to have Canada meet its obligations under international law, and as well as to act under concrete policy measures. So we'll start off with Brother Rais, and then we'll go to Sister Naila, and I'll have Brother Aiden conclude the program, inshallah.
I will start with skepticism. Although just coming from, it was just last weekend, mashallah, at the ICNA conference, Dr. Yasir Qadi was saying, we cannot, as Muslims, we always have to be hopeful. We cannot be hopeless. And he gave the example of, he quoted that ayah where Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the cave, and they were waiting. Abu Bakr Siddiq was like, Ya Rasulullah, if they just look below, they will find us. And then the ayah, إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ لَا تَحْزَنْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, we are two, but the third one is Allah, subhanAllah, So we cannot be hopeless. And so we have to push on whatever mechanism we have. But starting with my skepticism, Canada did sign as a party to the convention eventually, after dragging feet all this while. It had to be Gambia, a small country in West Africa, that took up the courage, and of course with the help of OIC, they filed at the International Court of Justice for breach of genocide convention, and brought Myanmar to the court. Just like, mashallah, South Africa brought Israel to the court on the issue of Palestine. So why I'm skeptic is because as a Palestinian activist today, and a Rohingya, of course, we are hypocritical. Like Canada, no matter after dragging feet and after saying, letting even Gambia take the lead, they are still, like Sister Saliha mentioned, they don't have a clear path forward because it was only a token step. And how do you know it's a token step? Because they don't do anything for Palestine, It's a clear genocide, like every, Brother Alex mentioned about the 10 stages of genocide, but go to the Genocide Convention according to Rome statutes. In the definition you have 5 criteria. If any of those 5 criteria, killing members of a group, causing body or mental harm to members of a group, bringing about conditions of life that will prevent growth of children, members of a group, transferring, all of those criteria meet in the situation of Palestinians. But they would not say anything. They're in fact enabling the genocide of the Palestinians by continuing to supply them arms and continue to support and say Israel has a right to defend. So where would such hypocriticism stand for, your token measure towards the Burmese Muslims, towards the Rohingya situation? So I have my skepticism over there. But regardless of that, we cannot lose hope. We utilize whatever mechanisms we have at our disposal, and we push for them. So if Canada has taken at least that token measure, we keep pushing through channels like, mashallah, Justice for All is doing, to get Canada to be accountable for whatever they have, at least by token measure, said that they would do. So if we can get Canada to put in their resources, their monetary resources, or their political resources, in order to leverage whatever Gambia has brought to the International Court of Justice and bring Myanmar to account, then yes, we should keep pushing for that. But let me tell you, they're not too keen, and I know that from practice. The last time, Sister Saliha rightly mentioned, the last time they renewed their funding for the refugee camps was back in the previous budget in 2020, the one that was released in 2021. And after that, the 2024 budget that was released, there's no renewal, there is nothing. So you are supposed to sit, my colleagues are supposed to sit in the refugee camps, wait for a bag of rice. The women who are widowed because their husbands were slaughtered, their fathers were slaughtered, their uncles, they would wait in queues for UN World Food Program to give them a bag of rice or a bag of dal, and if they don't get that, they eat just one meal a day. And that's because countries like Canada do not want to renew it. They don't want to put their own, whatever they have promised for the Genocide Convention, they don't want to do it, but we got to keep pushing, and that's what we can do by carrying on our advocacy work.
Thank you so much. Inshallah, 1 minute each, Sister Naila, Brother Aiden, what the Canadian government can do. Thank you.
I'll cut it short. I think Canadian government has already seen what, where, and to what extent Indian government can interfere, and how the RSS has come to Canada, and we have seen the killing of a Canadian on a Canadian soil, a Canadian citizen. So I think that has already given enough proof for them to act, to take action against these organizations who are not only in India, but in Canada. They have exported the same hate ideology here itself. So they should take some concrete step to further investigate, have a parliamentary committee to take some actions against these organizations who are supporting RSS, and should ban RSS completely here in Canada. And we also request the Canadian government to be more vocal for the voices of minorities in India. Jazakallah.
Thank you. I would just reiterate what has been said already, that we know the Canadian government has had different approaches towards these different genocidal situations. As we mentioned, in the case of the Uyghurs, there was a whole study by the Subcommittee on International Human Rights declaring it a genocide. In the case of the Rohingya, they joined the Gambia's case. In the case of India, we have had condemnation of the foreign interference. We've expelled certain Indian diplomats, but there's been little condemnation of the actual persecution that's happening in India itself. And for Central African Republic, there's been little accountability. So I would say that the law is there for these situations. It's just a matter of our continuing to raise awareness and sustained advocacy on these matters to get the Canadian government to act, whether it's applying diplomatic pressure on these countries, amending our bilateral trade agreements, or imposing sanctions or measures of these effect, inshallah.
I wanted to give a huge thank you, Jazakallahu alf khair, to both Brother Rais, Sister Naila, for your insights and your knowledge sharing with us today. Thank you, Brother Aiden, for elaborating on the report. I wanted to share with the remaining audience that you can find a digital copy of this report on our website. That's justiceforallcanada.org. Please sign up for our newsletters. You can do that through the clipboards or online as well as you can speak with our panelists after the program. And it's such an honor to the Islamic Institute of Toronto, such a historic organization that's been dedicated to challenging Islamophobia. Our whole team was very stoked to be able to bring some of our work here and to speak with your respected audience and your supporters. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone. Inshallah, hope that everybody gets home safe. Assalamu alaikum, take care.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Saliha and the rest of the panel. Thank you for, thanks to Justice for All Canada for coming and making the presentation. Now I would like to ask Brother Farhad to make some closing remarks.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respected panelists, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are missing Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick today. He is our stalwart, but he is right now in the UK, and he is actually giving a keynote address at the Global Peace and Unity Festival, which is being attended by over 50,000 people. So alhamdulillah, and he sends his regards. And I know his heart is here with us, so I just wanted to acknowledge him and acknowledge all of you from Justice for All Canada. Great organization. Brother Taha Ghayur, who is the head of the organization, is not here also because he had another appointment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of them. And bless all of you for coming out. Before I leave you to go, I want to encourage you to write. One of the things that I do is to write. And even if you don't know how to write in an excellent form, it's important to write. Even if you make grammatical mistakes, even if you can't make a full sentence, it's important to write. Write to your MPs, write to your leaders, write on your social media posts, because we need to control the narrative. And I just wanted to share with you a poem that I wrote. I wrote a number of poems. Inshallah, I'll get them published one day. But it does, subhanAllah, it helps me with my own emotions, but I think also it's a message for everyone. This poem is called When the Storm Clouds Gather. And it is for Palestine, but also for every other place where Muslims are being oppressed. So here it is. When the storm clouds gather and darkness creeps in, when the river turns red and the olive trees are uprooted, when homes are demolished and the children searching through the rubble find small joy in a toy that remains untouched, when the bodies are found gunned down mercilessly, when a family is burnt to death taking shelter in their tent, when the tiny coffins are draped with the innocence of the child and lowered into earth's outstretched arms, when young voices seeking freedom and dignity are silenced by loud gunfire and smoke obscures the horror in their terrified eyes, when the voices of power refuse to speak the truth for friendship or false loyalty, when no one is left to look into the tear-filled eyes of the orphan, then seek refuge from the divine wrath for your silence, your turning away. It is a crime in his books to be opened one day. And the orphan and the widow, nurtured with faith, lift their hands in supplication, for he listens to the prayer of the oppressed, and their bodies, broken as they are, will draw strength and stand again and again against this atrocity. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward all of you for coming. Next week, inshallah, we have our final week. And we have been dealing with all of the issues for the past 3 weeks. Next week, inshallah, we will give a glimmer of hope, because there's a lot that is being done. We need to put a spotlight on that, inshallah. May Allah reward you. Please enjoy some chai and a small pizza, and inshallah come back next week and bring some friends with you. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruk wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.